Okay, I'm gonna go over what it's needed to pay attention to in order to pull a Porsche engine out of the car. So my car is a 75 911 SC, originally out of 2.7. However, this is the built 3-liter engine, but it's still got the 915 transmission in it. Um, yeah, I'm a little dirty, but I've had some issues that had some oil go everywhere, so I'm pulling it out for some upgrades. But there was nothing wrong with the engine, but we're just going to do some upgrades, as I mentioned. On the transaxle, actually, we're going to put a limited slip in it and go through the clutch. Clutch is brand new, make sure it's cool, and then upgrade the fuel pumps, things of that nature. So got some upgrades to go into it. Looking forward to that. But in any case, I want to show what it's necessary in order to pull the engine. It's really not that hard to pull it. You might take, I don't know, half a day if you're methodical, a few hours if you really know what you're doing and got the right tools, but it's not that difficult. In any case, you want to pull it out with the transaxle intact. It's just a lot easier that way, based on weight and being able to have access to everything. And then when you do it, you kind of want to go over everything and make sure it's cool while you're in it. So my car is sitting in the garage. It's not up on a hoist or anything like that. So the main thing is you want to jack the car up, and then the jack stands are at max under here. So you will have space. They're at max over there. And I use the torsion bars as support, and that ought to give you enough clearance. So what you want to concentrate on is taking off the top of the motor first. I'll show you that. This is the top of the engine. So you've got your upper intake, and then of course the alternator. I have an intercooler, so got to take all that stuff off of the motor, right? So that way you have clearance, so that way when you pull it out underneath the car, then nothing gets obstructed. If you try to leave this stuff on, not going to happen. Unless you have a hoist, you can drop the complete motor down, no problem. But obviously you're sitting on the ground. The max height is going to be what your jack stands have. That's going to be it. That's all. Okay, first and foremost, you want to remove this pin. This pin that goes into the shaft is located behind the two front seats in the center of the seats. I'll show you where that is in just a second. You want to take that pin completely out because it has a point in it, and so even if this threading is loose, it's still going to be in that shaft because that's what controls the gears, and it's not going to slide out. I'll show you what that looks like. So this is the little guy that you're looking for. That makes it easier. See, there's a point after the threads that can still be in that shaft, and it won't release, so you got to take it completely out. So it is an Allen at the top of the head, which you see right there. Well, you guys know what Allen wrist looks like. So it's an Allen, so that's what you want to take out, and that's what goes into that shaft. Next, there are two wires that plug in a sensor. I forget what that sensor is. I don't claim to know every single thing about my sensors, so I will point at what I need to disconnect because I'm very much aware of it, but I do know that has to be disconnected. It's still found in that same location. This whole area right here is in that particular opening that you'll find, so it's not hard to find. All right, next you're going to have your ground for your transmission right here. That's going to be exposed once you remove your bracket for the transmission that will be sitting right here. Mine is off, but you have to take the now let me do this another step. So in order to do that, I have access to this particular area. You got your sway bar that runs right here. So you only have to release the sway bar with the two bolts at the elbow. I'll show you what that looks like. All right, that's the elbow right there that you see. There's brass, goes around the bushing right here that you see in the center of the screen, and that bolts up into that area where you see the bolts. So you just have to undo the sway bar and drop it down. You then will have access to that ground, and also that's the bracket right there that holds the transmission up to the car. So you want to undo those. Next, you will have your speedometer sensor, which is going to be there. I'll show you where that looks like, or where it's located on the transaxle, so that way you can undo that. So this is the area where that speedometer cable goes to, and you're going to undo the screw right here at the top, and it just comes off because that little metal piece right here is what keeps it in place. And I believe it's a magnetic pickup in there that allows the gauge to read what's going on in there. I have the 993 VDO gauges, so if that helps, that's why mine looks that way. I think some of the older engines have, older transaxles have that cable that runs up to the speedometer, but mine is digital, so that's that situation. Hold on, gotta take care of some oil. Cat litter is always my best friend whenever you're working in the garage. Perfect for some oil. Soaks it up really, really quick so it doesn't stain the concrete. And then all you gotta do is to sweep up when your project's over. 99-cent store, fellas. All right, back in the game. So that's basically it with the transaxle, right? Well, I'm sorry, no it's not. The obvious transaxle hubs. This is going to be hexagon bolts that go in here. Make sure, and I can't stress this enough, it happened to me once, make sure you use the blue Loctite on these bolts when you put them back in. If you don't, they can and will back out on you. You do not want that type of situation where this comes undone and then, well, I'll tell you what happens. So if this comes undone, depending on which side it is, because most of these transaxles do not have a posi in it, if the one that comes undone that has the torque going to it, you will lose power. You will not go anywhere. It'll feel like the transaxle dropped out of the car, or your clutch dropped out, or something stupid. It happened to me at a really, really slow mile an hour, so I didn't cause any damage. But I do know the circumstances. You don't want those circumstances. I realized that one side didn't have the Loctite in it, and they backed out. Luckily, all the bolts were still there. But I do know that if it happens, you can go to Ace Hardware. They really helped me out. Got all the bolts at one time or another. Before they have the size, I cannot tell you what size they are, but you want to make sure you have those tight. But that's what you undo. The next thing you're going to do is the clutch. So on the other side, your clutch cable is going to run through here. Also have a new clutch cable that's going to go on. I was reading a lot about the clutch actually stretching over time. I don't believe I've ever replaced it, so I got a new clutch. Average price I think was like 70 bucks or something like that. So you want to undo your clutch that runs along this side. Not that hard. Just take the adjustable screw that puts the tension on it. It pops down. The end. So that's it as far as the transaxle is concerned. The next thing you want to jump on, oh, I'm sorry. Well, these are your accelerator cables. These connect to the pedal up front, and then obviously there's a linkage that goes from here up on top of the engine. So that would be the next thing. You want to pay attention to that. Okay, jumping on the other side of the transaxle, you got your starter. So you're gonna have your positives that run over to your starter, and then it's not that hard. I mean, obviously you've got your screws, your bolts. I tend to put your bolts and everything back in place when I take things off, so I don't have to hunt for them later. But you want to undo your starter, and as you see, the starter can stay in place. Just unhook the wires, and you ought to be good to go. You don't have to take it off the bell housing. On the left side, so or passenger side, I should say. Why is that bent? That should not have been bent. I'm noticing that right now. Okay, so these are your oil lines. They're going up to your reservoir or your tank that's on the side. So you certainly want to undo those. You can disconnect it from different ways, from here or here. I disconnected it this way, but as long as it's disconnected from the engine. That's the only thing that you have on this side of the motor, which is the passenger side of the motor, that you have to disconnect. Aside from, maybe I jumped ahead. But the obvious, you have your top oil line that feeds into the reservoir. But I was about to say, these are the only hoses that you have to disconnect on the passenger side, aside from your spark plug wires. This is the twin plug, so I have spark plug wires on the top, and then I got a second row down at the bottom. So for me, Got to disconnect both of those on both sides of the engine. And mine are custom from Granatelli, so it's not hard to put them back because I had them custom made in the German colors of the black, red, and gold. So not that hard for me to put them back in the proper order. Again, that's it on the top of the motor. Excuse me, on the passenger side of the motor. So jumping on the other side, again, spark plug wires, all your turbo hoses and things like that from me are on this side, so I have to remember where they go, but obviously they have to be disconnected. But again, every application is going to be different. But if you're normally aspirator, you're obviously not going to have those. But the thing is you got to pay attention. Just go around the motor methodically and make sure everything is disconnected. Keep everything intact if in fact you can, so that way it's easier to put back together. Always make sure that once your top of the motor is off, and then your intake holes are here, make sure you cover them up so that way you don't get any debris, bolts, anything like that to fall in there to cause a valve to get stuck or go inside the engine, mess up your pistons. That can be a serious problem. Have had that happen on my 2.7 a long time ago. Screw made it inside there, and huge issue, obviously. Messed up the whole motor. So basically that's it. Use a regular jack to drop the motor down. Once you've undone the bolts for the motor bracket or the engine bracket, those two are your last two that you're going to undo, so that way the motor just basically drops out at that point. You want to support it with your jack just before that, obviously, but once you undo the bolts and you drop the jack, it should come right from underneath the motor, underneath the car very easily, and that way you got your motor and your transaxle all in one. And this is what you're going to have in the end. One other tricky thing I do want to mention, and it's kind of a pain, when you're taking off the top parts of the motor, the upper intake and whatnot, this bracket, which is for your oil, and I think it goes down to my feed for the turbo, but mine goes across the upper intake, and it has to fit back to the sensor back there, and it goes through the intake, and it's really tricky to get off, and you have to get it off while it's inside the motor. Inside the car, so it's kind of frustrating, but it is what it is. These are your ground and your power that's coming up to your alternator, and then of course you got your other sensors and everything on the front of the motor. But basically that's all it is in taking a motor and transaxle out of a Porsche safely, and I guess kind of keeping up with the basics, unless you got something super custom that you got to do, but keeping up with the basics and pulling the engine. And do whatever you got to do, whatever reasons cause you to pull the motor. That's what you got to do. I think I would probably go after a new belt, even though my belt is cool. I think I'm gonna put a new one on there so I can have some nice tension. Always renew that. I don't ever want to have an issue with that. Always check that area to make sure you got clearances, no bolts or anything like that. That's gonna be chafing at that belt, because it's very easy to have something fall down in that area. You can have some issues. One other thing too, I had one of these whoa, see what we find? That's not cool. Oh man, that's what I call investigations. Anyway, I actually had a bad experience with one of these cogs too. I'm gonna show you. This is what I had before when we were trying to get the motor started, and for whatever reason, because there's a magnetic pickup, but on one of those squares, I'll try to show you, one of these squares, it was chipped, and this sits behind the engine. So in case you come across this situation, I'm just trying to highlight it so that way you can see it. But Turbo Joe, which is my engine tuner, was able to discover it, and to me that was some CSI. There it is right there. I don't know if you can see that. Hold on. Man, I hope you guys can see that right there. But there was a chip right there on the cog. And because of that chip, whoa, it's reflective right there. See that? So because it wasn't completely square, the engine management couldn't pick up the signal, and sometimes the motor would like miss, and it would create a serious problem. But you know, it sits just like that one, just like that, and with it in the car, I mean, it was, man, to discern what that was pretty trick. So had to have another one custom made. That is the custom made one, but that is moving around like that. I don't even understand why it would be moving around like that. But that is certainly a problem that has to be addressed. Shucky ducky. Anyway, I highly recommend you inspect as many things as possible. That probably can contribute to like a slow start because it's not going to be turning with the same speed as the crank. All kinds of things can go wrong with that. I mean, just in shifting or the motor knowing where the crank is and know about. See, I'll show you what. This is the where am I sensor? It's a magnetic pickup. I tuck it away. Here it is, because that thing is expensive. I really don't want nothing to happen to it. But this is the magnetic pickup that sits right on top of that cog that picks up all the information on the crank to know what's going on with the motor as additional input to know what to do. Man, that's annoying. I gotta go back in and fix stuff, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because at least now you know what's up, right? You know what to fix. Where am I? I was talking about making sure this was sealed so that way you don't have anything to go in there. I've had a lot of issues with dumb stuff over the years with my motors. I mean, just silliness. So I try to pay attention to things that are not the obvious, just like that, and the obvious. But like I said, everything, man. If it's supposed to be tight, make sure it's tight. If it's supposed to be sealed, make sure it's sealed. Just like we noticed there was a bend over here in the oil reservoir. I think, wait a minute, I think that's the oil cooler. I don't know all the parts of the motor. I just know where they are and probably the things that they do sometimes. But for me, I try to really understand the condition it's supposed to be in, so I can see any irregularities like that. So we're gonna bend that back out. It's not like we got to get a new one, but I'll get everything cleaned off so that way we can see if there's any cracks, if the oil is seeping from someplace where it shouldn't. But that's the other thing too. Always make sure everything is all nice and clean. Like I said, I had an issue with the hub, so that's why I've got grease and everything everywhere. But everything is going to be reset, powder coated, and whatnot. So that is what you got to do in order to pull this motor out.